It was late, and I was just about ready to crash. The TV droned softly in the background as I flipped through a half-empty notebook, jotting down reminders for the week ahead. My phone buzzed on the edge of the coffee table, and I glanced at the screen. Her name lit up, accompanied by a text: "Car broke down. Need a ride. Here's the address." I sat up, my pulse quickening. Something felt off. We'd just talked earlier, and she never mentioned going out. And this address? It wasn't anywhere near her usual haunts. No friends lived over there, no work-related errands. Nothing. It was the other side of town entirely, the side neither of us had any reason to visit. Still, I grabbed my keys and headed out. If she needed me, I wasn't going to leave her stranded. But as I drove through quiet, unfamiliar streets, I couldn't stop wondering, why was she here in the first place? The location she sent led me to a residential street lined with faded houses. The street lights were dim, some flickering, casting long shadows over the cracked sidewalks. Her car was easy to spot, parked crookedly at the curb with the hood popped open. As I pulled up behind it, I saw her standing on the sidewalk, looking down at her phone. She didn't see me right away. For a moment, I watched her from the car, trying to read her expression. Was she upset? Frustrated? Nervous? I couldn't tell. I got out and called out to her. "Hey, you okay?" She looked up, startled. "Oh, hey. Yeah, sorry about this. Thanks for coming." Her tone was light, almost too casual. She glanced back at her car and ran a hand through her hair. "I don't know what happened. It just started making a weird noise, and then it died on me." I nodded, stepping closer. "All right, well, let's see if I can figure it out. You sure you're okay?" "Yeah," she said quickly. "I'm fine. Just really annoyed. I had to pull over, and now I'm stuck here." I leaned over the open hood, pretending to inspect the engine. I didn't know much about cars, but I fiddled with a few things, checked the battery connection, looked at the belts. It all seemed fine. I turned to her. "When did it start acting up?" Her eyes shifted slightly, and she hesitated before answering. Just a few minutes before I stopped here. I don't know, it's been making weird noises for a while." I frowned. "Weird noises for a while? Why didn't you say anything earlier? I could have had it looked at." "I guess I thought it was nothing," she said, her tone more defensive now. "It's not a big deal." But it was a big deal. She wasn't telling me something, and I could feel it in her every word, in the way she avoided looking at me for more than a few seconds. The unease in my gut grew stronger. "Well, it might be better to get it towed," I said, standing up straight and wiping my hands on my jeans. "I don't think I can fix it here. Do you want me to call someone?" "No, that's okay," she said quickly. "I'll take care of it tomorrow. Can you just give me a ride home?" "Sure," I said. "But, why were you out here, anyway?" She paused, glancing down at her phone again. "I just went for a drive. Needed to clear my head." That answer didn't sit right. She had no reason to be in this part of town, none that I could think of. I studied her face, searching for a crack in the story, but she kept it steady, her expression neutral. "All right," I said finally. "Let's get you home." As she climbed into the car, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. I glanced at the clock on the dashboard. It was almost midnight. She had no reason to be here. No reason at all, except, maybe, for one. The drive back was silent at first. She stared out the window, her arms folded tightly across her chest. The glow of the street lights washed over her face in rhythmic intervals, but she didn't say much. I tried not to push her. I figured if I kept the atmosphere calm, maybe she'd offer more details on her own. But with every block we passed, the tension only seemed to grow. "So," I started carefully, my voice low, "did you get to where you were going before the car broke down?" She shifted slightly in her seat, her eyes still fixed on the passing houses. "I didn't have anywhere specific in mind," she said. "I just needed to drive around." I glanced at her, then back at the road. "Just needed to drive around? At this time of night?" She sighed, her breath fogging the window slightly. "I just needed some space. It's not a big deal." My grip tightened on the steering wheel. "Not a big deal?" I repeated. "Your car breaks down, you're stuck in the middle of nowhere, and it's not a big deal." Her shoulders stiffened. "I mean, yeah, it's frustrating, but I'll get it fixed tomorrow. It's not the end of the world." I could feel myself getting frustrated, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Okay," I said evenly. I'm worried about you, You know? I'm trying to understand why you were all the way across town in a neighborhood you never go to. Her head snapped toward me, her expression defensive. Why does it matter where I was? I just wanted to drive, clear my head, think about some things. Do I really need to explain every little thing I do? I held my tongue for a moment, weighing my response. No, you don't, I said. But if something's bothering you, I'd rather you talk to me about it than drive off to wherever this was. It's late. It's not exactly the safest part of town. She crossed her arms again, leaning against the door. I don't want to fight about this. I told you why I was out. I just needed space. Can we leave it at that? Her tone was final, but it didn't satisfy me. Something about the way she avoided my gaze, the quickness of her answers, made me feel like she was trying to close the conversation before it could go anywhere. It felt like she was dodging the truth. When we finally pulled into the driveway, she was out of the car before I even shut off the engine. I followed her inside, watching as she kicked off her shoes and headed straight for the kitchen. She didn't offer me a drink or ask if I wanted something to eat, the way she usually did. Instead, she busied herself at the counter, pouring a glass of water, her back to me the entire time. I leaned against the doorway, crossing my arms. You're upset, I said quietly. She turned around, glass in hand, and gave me a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I'm just tired, she said. It's been a long night. I get that, I said, stepping closer. But I also get the feeling you're not telling me something. Her smile faded. What are you trying to say? I hesitated, then took a deep breath. I'm trying to say that this doesn't feel like just a car breaking down. You weren't anywhere near where you usually go. You're being vague about what you were doing. And now, you're acting like I'm the bad guy for asking questions. Her jaw tightened, and she set the glass down on the counter. I'm not acting like you're the bad guy, she said, her voice sharper now. I just don't know why you're making this into something it's not. I'm making it into something? I said, my frustration bubbling to the surface. You called me out of nowhere, sent me an address across town, and now you're brushing me off when I try to understand what happened. What am I supposed to think? You're supposed to trust me, she shot back. Not grill me like I've done something wrong. I stared at her, my hands on my hips, trying to make sense of what was happening. She was never this defensive. Normally, if she had a bad day or just needed to clear her head, she'd tell me. We'd talk about it. But tonight, she was putting up walls I'd never seen before. Look, I said, softening my tone. I just want to know if there's something going on that you're not telling me. If you needed space, that's fine. But why there? Why that part of town? Why now? She shook her head, her voice calmer now but still firm. I don't know how many times I can say it. I just needed to get out of the house, and that's where I ended up. That's all. I searched her face, looking for any sign that she was lying, but she held her ground. If she was hiding something, she wasn't giving it away. Fine, I said finally. If that's your answer, I'll take it. She nodded, her shoulders relaxing slightly. Thank you. But as I went to bed that night, the unease didn't leave me. Her explanation didn't add up, and her reaction only made me more suspicious. I told myself I'd let it go, but deep down, I knew I couldn't. There was something she wasn't telling me. I just didn't know how to get her to say it. The next morning, I couldn't stop replaying her words. The way she claimed it was nothing, how defensive she'd gotten, and how quickly she shut down the conversation, it all felt wrong. I had always trusted her, but something about this didn't sit right. I tried to push it aside as I went about my day. Work kept me busy for a while, and for a few hours, I managed to focus on other things. But by lunchtime, my mind was wandering again. That address she sent, it was still burned into my memory. It wasn't just that it was far from where she normally went. It was also a neighborhood that had no connection to us at all. No friends, no family, no reason. At least, no reason that I knew of. When I got home that evening, she greeted me with a warm smile, as if nothing had happened. She asked how my day was, mentioned that she'd called a tow truck for her car, and even offered to make dinner. It was almost too normal, too perfect. I went along with it, trying not to let my doubts show, but the questions kept bubbling up in the back of my mind. As we ate, I tried to steer the conversation toward the previous night, hoping she might let something slip. So, how long were you stuck out there before you called me? I asked casually, twirling pasta onto my fork. She shrugged, taking a sip of water. Not too long. Maybe 15, 20 minutes. I nodded slowly. Must have been frustrating. It was, she said. I was lucky you were free. Thanks again for coming out. Her tone was light, appreciative. But it didn't match the tension from the night before. That defensiveness was gone, replaced by easy conversation. It felt rehearsed, like she'd had all day to prepare this version of events. Did you see anyone else around? I asked. I mean, being stuck on the side of the road at night seems like a sketchy area. She hesitated for just a moment, then shook her head. No, not really. It was pretty quiet. That's why I called you. I didn't feel safe waiting there alone. Her answer was reasonable, but something about her pause caught my attention. It was subtle, but I noticed it. A tiny crack in her story. Later that night, after she'd gone to bed, I sat in the living room, scrolling through my phone. I debated looking up that address, seeing if there was anything nearby that might explain why she'd been there. But what was I even hoping to find? A parking lot with a hidden sign that said secret meetups here? I laughed bitterly at my own paranoia, but I couldn't let it go. If she was telling the truth, why did it still feel like she wasn't? I opened Google Maps and typed in the address. The satellite view showed a rundown residential street. I zoomed in, scanning the houses. They looked old, neglected. A few yards had overgrown bushes, cars parked haphazardly on the curb. There was nothing that stood out, no businesses, no landmarks, just a quiet, unremarkable street. But that only made it stranger. She had no connection to this place, no reason to be there. Except, maybe, for one. I closed the app, feeling no closer to an answer. If I wanted the truth, I'd have to ask her directly. But how many times could I ask before it crossed the line into accusing her of lying? She'd already gotten defensive once. If I pushed too hard, would she shut down completely? Would I risk making things worse? My thoughts churned as I sat there in the dark, the faint glow of the TV casting long shadows on the walls. I didn't know what to believe anymore. Her story didn't add up, but I didn't have proof that she was hiding anything. All I had was a feeling, an unsettling, nagging feeling that something wasn't right. I decided I'd give it one more day. If she didn't bring it up again, if she didn't offer more details on her own, I'd have to ask her outright. I couldn't keep this inside, festering. I needed answers. Even if I wasn't sure I wanted to hear them. By the following night, my patience was gone. She had carried on as if nothing had happened, and I had followed suit. But the doubts were louder now, impossible to silence. Every time I looked at her, every time she smiled or laughed, the questions in my mind grew sharper. I needed to know the truth. I couldn't let it keep eating away at me. She was sitting on the couch, flipping through channels, when I walked in. I stood there for a moment, watching her. She looked so calm, so normal, as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed, at least for me. We need to talk, I said, my voice more firm than I expected. She looked up, her brow furrowing. Okay, she said cautiously. What's going on? I sat down across from her, leaning forward with my elbows on my knees. I need you to be honest with me, I said. About why you were across town the other night. Her face shifted, subtle, but I noticed it. A flicker of tension in her jaw, a slight narrowing of her eyes. I already told you, she said. I was driving around, trying to clear my head. I shook my head. That doesn't make sense. You never go to that part of town. You've never mentioned it before. And when I asked about it, you got defensive. It feels like you're not telling me something. Her lips parted slightly, as if she were about to speak, but she hesitated. Then she leaned back, crossing her arms. Why are you still pushing this? She asked, her tone sharper now. I told you what happened. Why isn't that enough? Because it doesn't add up, I said. You called me out of the blue, at a random address, with no explanation. You said you were stuck there for 15 minutes, but it felt like you'd been there longer. And when I ask about it, you act like I'm accusing you of something. She stared at me, her expression guarded. I don't know what you want me to say, she said slowly. I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was just out driving. That's it. But why there? I pressed. Why that street? Why that neighborhood? Her arms tightened around herself. I don't have an answer for that, she said. It's just where I ended up. It's just where you ended up. I repeated, disbelief creeping into my voice. Do you hear how that sounds? She stood up, turning away from me. I'm not going to sit here and be interrogated, she said, her voice rising. You're acting like I've done something terrible, like I need to explain every step I took. I told you what happened. I don't know why you won't believe me. I stood up, too, the frustration boiling over. Because you're not acting like someone with nothing to hide, I said. You're defensive. You're vague. You keep shutting me down every time I ask for details. If you were really just driving around, why not tell me that without getting angry? Why not be more open about it? She spun around to face me, her eyes flashing. Because you're making this into something it's not, she snapped. I needed space. I went for a drive. The car broke down. I called you. That's all there is to it. Her voice cracked on the last words, and for a moment, I saw something else, fear, maybe. Regret. I couldn't tell. But it only deepened my doubt. I don't think that's all there is to it, I said quietly. And I think you know that. She stared at me, her breathing uneven. Then she turned away again, running a hand through her hair. I don't know what you want me to say, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know how to convince you that I'm telling the truth. I stood there, watching her, feeling the distance between us grow. The silence was heavy, oppressive. I wanted to keep pushing, to demand answers, but I could see that she was on the verge of shutting down completely. And if that happened, I might never get the truth. I just need you to be honest, I said finally. I need to know that you're not hiding anything. Because right now, it feels like you are. She turned back to me, her eyes glistening. I'm not hiding anything, she said. I swear, I'm not. But her voice wavered, and I wasn't sure I believed her. I wasn't sure I ever would. The silence between us lingered long after the confrontation. For the next few days, we barely spoke more than a handful of words to each other. She would leave the room when I walked in, and I found myself retreating into my own thoughts rather than trying to bridge the gap. I knew I couldn't leave things the way they were, but I also didn't know how to move forward. I had demanded honesty, yet her insistence that she wasn't hiding anything left me with a hollow, unresolved feeling. I thought about letting it go. Maybe it really was nothing, just a random drive, a coincidence that her car happened to break down in a place she'd never been before. But every time I tried to believe that, I came back to her defensiveness, her vague answers. If there was nothing to hide, why not tell me more? Why not explain what had been on her mind that night, what had driven her to that part of town? The more I tried to convince myself to drop it, the stronger my need for clarity became. One evening, as she was cleaning up the kitchen after dinner, I walked in and leaned against the counter. She didn't look up at first, just kept drying a dish and setting it aside. I took a deep breath, deciding to try again, this time without anger, without frustration, just an honest attempt to understand. I need to talk to you, I said, my voice softer than before. She paused, then placed the dish on the rack and turned to face me. Her eyes were wary, her shoulders tense. What is it now? I'm not here to fight, I said quickly. I just want to understand. That night, when your car broke down, what were you really doing out there? I'm not accusing you of anything. I just want the truth. She sighed heavily, leaning back against the counter, her arms crossed. I already told you, she said. I went for a drive. I nodded slowly. Okay. You went for a drive. But why that neighborhood? Why not somewhere familiar, somewhere closer to home? Her gaze dropped to the floor, and for a moment, I thought she was going to brush me off again. But then she let out another sigh, this one quieter, almost defeated. Fine, she said. You're right. I wasn't just driving around. My heart pounded as I waited for her to continue. I went to see someone, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I felt my chest tighten. Someone? I repeated. Who? She met my eyes then, and I saw the guilt etched on her face. A friend, she said. Just a friend. Someone I used to know. I hadn't seen them in a long time, and I thought I'd reach out. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, my voice steady, though I could feel anger and hurt bubbling just beneath the surface. Because I knew you'd react like this, she said quickly. I knew you'd think it was something it wasn't. So it wasn't anything? I asked. You just decided, out of the blue, to reconnect with an old friend on the other side of town. She hesitated again. It wasn't planned. I had been thinking about it for a while, and that night, she broke off, shaking her head. I don't know. I just drove there. And then the car broke down, and everything got so messed up. I studied her face, trying to read the truth in her eyes. Her words had the ring of honesty, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she still wasn't telling me the whole story. Who is this friend? I asked finally. And why did you feel like you had to hide it from me? It doesn't matter who it is, she said, her tone defensive again. What matters is that I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't cheat, I didn't lie, I just wanted to see someone I used to care about. And when the car broke down, I panicked, and I called you. Her words stung. The fact that she hadn't cheated didn't erase the fact that she had kept this from me, that she had gone behind my back to see someone she didn't want me to know about. You don't think lying by omission is still lying? I asked, my voice quiet but firm. She looked away, her jaw tightening. I didn't mean to hurt you, she said softly. I wasn't trying to hide something bad, I just didn't know how to explain it. For a long moment, we stood there in silence. I wanted to yell, to demand more answers, to make her admit everything. But at the same time, I could see that she was already beating herself up over this. And maybe that was the real reason she had been so defensive, because she knew she'd made a mistake, even if it wasn't as terrible as I had feared. I don't know if I can move past this, I said finally. I don't know if I can trust you again. She looked up, her eyes shimmering with tears. I'll do whatever it takes, she said. I'll prove to you that I'm not lying anymore. I'll be completely honest from now on. Just, please don't give up on us. I didn't say anything. I just nodded slowly, feeling the weight of her words. I didn't know if I believed her yet. I didn't know if we could fix this. But I knew one thing for certain. The truth, no matter how painful, was better than the lies.